What I would like to do now is to tell you a little bit of the context in which XDW was born. It was not an easy birth. It took about 3 years of hard thinking by people like Luca and Ariana, other people around the world, to gel a number of concepts that you will find quite disturbing, quite innovative, and hopefully quite powerful. Before we dive after the lunch, because we want to make sure you have a lot of energy into the technical detail of XDW, which will not be that complex. You're going to discover that XDW is quite simple once you understand the philosophy. And the philosophy is not intuitive from the start. Luca just told us about all of the various ways that IT has defined to share information or exchange it. By sharing, we mean that I place it so that all of you, if you are authorized, can have access to that information. Exchange it means I send it to you or to you, and none of you know about it. XDR, XDM do this. I give a piece of media to the patient. Where the patient goes, we, both of us, know about that information. No one else in the health system does. This may be needed because you don't have an XDS infrastructure in place. So that's a poor man version. This may be needed because what you are moving is highly confidential information that is not intended to be shared. I'm referring the patient to a psychiatrist for a very specific treatment, and the regional infrastructure says, no, don't give us this type of information. We are not trying to manage this yet. So we need those point-to-point conversation. What is important to understand is point-to-point and sharing with XDS in a region or XCA by collecting them together, federating them, are complementary, but sharing is of higher value if you can manage the rules about sharing, which is controlling security and controlling privacy. This is not easy, but this is doable. Sharing is important because we now can deal with a number of workflows where things don't happen as they were intended to happen initially. We don't really have statistics, but it seems that the percentage of workflows that happen in an intended way in healthcare for a given patient in a given situation are not that big. It probably happens 50, 60, 70% if we are lucky as intended, and there are 20, 30% that are happening with unexpected turns, things that are not done and other things that are done instead because of this diagnosis happening along the way. So it is important to realize, and this is a critical element in the design of XDW, is that we need to deal with workflows that are, because they are cross-institutional, they involve the broad spectrum of care delivery and health management. Those workflows are, by nature, attempted to be predicted, otherwise nobody could work, but never happen or rarely happen the way they were intended. You can call that fuzziness, uncertainty. I call this usual life in the world of healthcare. This is why we are putting highly skilled professionals, doctors, nurses, and IT professionals, to deal with a very complex problem of this reality of things are cannot be scripted in a narrow sense. Once we have understood this, we can step back and say, okay, what should we do? We can do what we do today in hospitals. How do we deal with workflow in hospitals? Let's talk about laboratory. Okay, we take a care delivery system, a nurse management system, a doctor management record system, places an order, send an order message to the laboratory, send the specimen, do the little analysis, and returns a laboratory report. The way we do this, the way most of you in hospitals or in your products are doing this today, you use messages, where you create an order message from A to B, and a report message from B to A, and sometimes copied in a number of other places. Why are we doing this in hospital? Because the systems are very stable. They don't appear or disappear overnight. There is a CIO in the hospital, somebody who is in charge of the architecture, the IT architecture there, and who makes decision, who says, for this workflow problem, the data will start from this system and go here, and then here, and then here. The rest is irrelevant. So we have all designed those messages that we keep on customizing and moving point to point across a well-scripted set of systems inside the hospital. In doing so, what are we doing? We are moving clinical information. We are moving workflow-related information. An order says, hey, do something about that stuff that I'm giving you. We are coordinating the work of the professionals that are working around those systems. And we are all doing this in those messages where we dump everything we need to manage all of those things. Have you noticed that each time we do an interconnection project, even with IT, we have to review every message, every field, every piece of data, and making sure that the system A sends what it needs to send to the utmost detail, and B needs to process it, and all of those things. This can be done. IT is helping streamline this work, but there is always a little specific to do there. How can we take this model and do this at a regional level across distinct institutions that have different IT systems that are evolving at different time for good or bad reasons, but this is reality. Institutions that vary from a very large 1,000-bed hospital all the way down to the little doctor that has a computer that is barely falling off his desk and who is trying to get information in and out, and anything and everything in between. And we need to manage the workflow across those entities from the smallest to the largest. From the care providing to the social entities, to the home health delivery system or home hospitalization delivery system, and so forth. So we have a variety of actors with a variety of IT systems, and no, this will never be built on a single central unique system that does everything for everybody. And this will not happen in the next 20 years. I can bet many bottles of champagne on this, and this will probably never happen. You know, when we look at the scope of the health and now social world, social management, that system that we try to also integrate, this is extremely large. Large number, large complexity, very different system coming from different places and evolving differently. Now that we understand where we start from, this fuzziness and softness of the workflow definition, and this variety of systems that we need to engage, how can we bring workflow there? What has been done? And this is what IT usually does. When somebody brings a problem, we say, have you a solution? Have you done something you would like IT to adopt? And we have seen the only solution that were brought to the table was a solution of saying, okay, we need a workflow between all of us. Good. We're going to set a web server in the middle, write an application for the workflow we want to do, and have each one of us log on that application and enter workflow requests for you to do certain things, for me to do certain things, and all of that stuff. This is how it works on the web today. This is how Facebook works. Facebook is a workflow organizer in a sense. Wonderful, but you put that web system in place for one workflow in one community, but get what? There are 500 people that are outside that are not here that will eventually join this workflow. And some of them may not be in the Veneto region. They may be in the region next door. They may be somewhere else in Italy. They may be outside of Italy. And those people are going to tell us one thing. I'm sorry. I am engaged in thousands of cross-institutional workflows with tens or hundreds of partners. If each group of partners for each workflow is creating a central web server to manage this workflow, my life becomes hell. I will have to log on all of those systems, understand what each one does, you know, and my secretary or myself, I cannot deal with that. I want my local system, with my user interface, with my system as it works today, to be my window into those workflow systems. I don't want to have to interact with those one-time things. Now, I'm not criticizing those. That's what we are doing today. This is probably the good and the best we can do today. But IT said, what can we do which takes us a step beyond? And that's where those three elements, we need better thing than people interacting on a web server. We need the fuzziness of the workflow to be accounted for, and this variety of and complex environment to address. What could we do? What should we do? In fact, what became rather obvious are two critical elements that needed to be addressed. The first one is it needs to be patient-centric. Now, everybody says patient-centric. That's politically correct. But what do we mean by having a workflow being patient-centric? It means that in the end, the state of the workflow, or what the workflow is or supposed to be or supposed to happen, is a piece of information that belongs to the patient record. Oh, you mean I'm going to have lab data, radiology data, summary data, allergy data, medication data, and workflow data in the patient record, in the shared patient record? Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, after all, that sounds like a reasonable idea. And then the second idea was to say, but we have to be careful. In workflow, even more than in anything else, the providers have to remain empowered. If workflow management means turning the doctors and the nurses in keyboard pushers that are constantly fighting the system that doesn't do what they want, this is a lost battle from the start. And when you move into the workflows in the data record access space, it's sensitive. When you move into the workflow space, it's not sensitive. It is life or death. So we need a workflow tool that does not always, but allows us to give full control to every provider that is going to be engaged in any step of this workflow. Full power. If the workflow allows, they need to be able to change the workflow from what it was intended to be to something completely new. Because if we put technical barriers there, we have lost. We have lost our customer base. We are trying to organize their work, and they're going to tell us, too rigid. You forgot about those 12 exceptions. Oh, by the way, it's not 12. The week after, it's 20, because I thought about 8 more. And the week after is going to be 100 exception. And in the end, you tell them, I cannot devise a system because there is more exception, and you never tell me about all of those exceptions. So, oh, so you mean those workflows are going to be workflows that are going to be learning, where we're going to be evolving them as we use them? Yeah, okay, 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 okay. So, patient-centric, provider empowerment. Good. So we understand the context, we understand those 2 golden criteria, and we also understand the scope. And if we understand the scope being 2 or 3 providers that have defined a little workflow between them, and they love it and they need it, and it's going to make them highly efficient, to thousands of partners, you don't even know who is participating in that workflow. You don't even want people to, the providers to register into a workflow, because you don't know at every point in time which are the providers that will partake to this type of workflow. This will change all the time, so you cannot even fix the participants into the workflow. So in terms of scope, we came to a drastic conclusion that I'm presenting not at a technical level, but at a business level. There shall be no system in the infrastructure that knows about the workflow. Because if I put a system in the infrastructure that knows about the workflow, I got in Veneto region, Arsenal and the IT guys, they're going to tell you, sorry, that was not in the requirement. You're asking me to change. I need to talk to a vendor who needs to talk to, come back in a year, we'll fix your workflow a year from now. You'll get a revolution. So if you put an IT system in the middle, in the infrastructure that is knowledgeable and micromanage the workflow, you are de-empowering the physicians, and you are creating in the infrastructure a nightmare to manage. Something that will not scale, that will not be sustainable, that has no chance of being deployed and last over the long run on a large number of workflows. And furthermore, if you put something in the middle of the Veneto region, and the region next door put something in the middle, and then you say, oh, how do we cross the border here? Oh, we need to federate those systems. Oh, but then we need to federate it with an Italian national system, which then needs to federate for the few things that are done abroad for one reason. Oh, yeah. You know, what is that stuff? You know, it's an architecture that we cannot even think or design. If we put nothing in the middle, hey, nothing to manage there. By the way, most workflows in human societies have nothing in the middle. There is a process, and we all participate into a workflow. When you organize a party with your friends, there is not an IT system in the middle that knows about that workflow. Your friend and you know, and you organize whatever you want to do next weekend. And it is not Facebook, or it is not Twitter, or it is not email, it is not, that knows about the workflow you're trying to deal with. So all of the tools we have today that are organizing workflow in our society, that are IT tool, web tool, are workflow neutral. So we better be workflow neutral, and the best way to be workflow neutral is not to put anything in the middle at all. Good. That's now creating an even more challenging problem. How can we ever reconcile all of those things? The idea there is to say what we need to share is not a machine, a system that is controlling and checking the workflow. It's simply data that speak for a given patient at a given point in time for a specific workflow instance about what is the state of this workflow, what's expected to happen. If we share only that little piece of data, if I read that data, I will know, oh, for this workflow, for that patient, this is what has happened. Oh, okay, good. This is what should happen. Oh, good. Oh, I can do this. That's my job. Oh, yeah, that's me. Oh, okay, fine. I'll do it. Okay? So if we only share data about the workflow and leave the edge system run the workflow by reading, writing that shared data, if the data can be shared at any scale, oh, but that's what XDS does. XDS, XCA, we know how to share data at a broad and large scale. Email, XDM, well, man, we can reach anywhere in the world here. Wow, okay, good. So if we put nothing in the middle, and the only thing we do is to share for a workflow a data descriptor, we might have a solution. So you mean there are no message, no request message, no confirmation message, no result message? No, 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 no. No, no, you write that you want a request, you read that you read the request and did the job, and on and on. And when that thing is done, and it stays there. Oh, because it's useful for others to know that a workflow has been executed, to know who was part of that workflow, because I may contact this provider and get more information. Oh, and you know what? It organizes all of the information we shared. So I can approach the patient record by asking the XDS registry, give me all of the document, that, and I get a short list, and I look at that information and import it and use it. But I now can say, give me all of the workflows of a certain type for a patient that have happened in the last 5 years. And I get the workflows, and with the workflows, I can probably get at the data. Ooh, so I'm now organizing data around workflows. So I have not only solved a workflow problem during the execution of the workflow, but I've also solved a workflow problem for the eternity afterwards. Have you ever been asked by folks to say, I really would like you to manage data by episode of care? There are probably different terms about this in Italian, so I'm not sure you fully understand, but yeah, it's clear. It's clear? Okay. And everybody who is trying to do episode of care is running against an almost impossible problem. Is if you try to reconstruct episode of care out of data, this is a quasi-impossible task. You discover that organizing data by episode of care works only if you track the data in the context of an episode, and an episode of care is actually a workflow entity. Ooh, so you mean that XDW is going to solve that infamous problem, organizing data by episode of care, that every provider has been asking for the last 20 or 30 years? Yes. So we are now looking at a solution of a problem that has actually a number of ramifications beyond its initial scope. I want to add 2 points. One of them, which is a response to a criticism that you will have or you should have about managing workflow, where we share data about the workflow so we can read it, update it, and progress the workflow. But I am a health authority. I have set rules in my region, and I want to make sure that every patient who has this disease receives those treatments within a certain time. I want to enforce certain protocols, certain care. Providers don't like that, but honestly, it's unavoidable. It makes sense, okay? Making good practice, care plans, or protocols is the trend in healthcare. And people say, wait a minute, if you share the data, if you empower the providers up to the point that they can change the workflow as it is, as they do it and redefine it, you are giving room to total freedom and you are encouraging the current chaos. I want to be able to enforce certain things. Very few things, but some critical things for specific workflows. And the answer to that is yes. It is simply another actor in the workflow. In the workflow, we have providers that are participating in achieving the workflow for a given patient and a specific workflow. And we have other workflow participants that are, I wouldn't say policemen, but they are watchers, quality improvement, care plan managers. You can give a lot of names to those things whose job is to check that things happen as they are intended, and if they don't happen as intended, they either have a way to track this, to notify people, wake them up, say, be careful, you're supposed to do this within a week, and it has been already 6 days, so it's time to think about it. Or warn the patient, or whoever needs to be alerted to correct things. So the participants in a workflow are not only providers, but they are those overseers, those entities who is going to suddenly say, you mean I can actually have statistics run on the workflow? By reading those workflow data, see how many workflow got started on an average day, on an average week, on an average month, and data mine how many of those were completed within a week, within a month, and whatever else. Yes. Wow. This is a dream. I can now know what's happening in my healthcare system without having to require every provider to fill forms and report things which they hate and they barely do, lie half of the time and whatever. So you are getting that picture. And my last point is the point of view of a vendor, of an implementer, which GE and many of you here are, and saying, what is that thing? Oh man, is it going to be a living nightmare to actually build that in existing products? Why? Because if I take an IT system in a hospital, that IT system, whatever it is already managing a workflow inside the hospital. This IT system is managing a workflow within a clinic or a doctor's office. Oh, okay, so they already manage pieces of the workflow. What I'm bringing here is connecting those pieces with XDW. So I have to make sure that I design XDW so that suddenly XDW becomes an input to those local workflows and record the output of those workflows and make them visible on the outside for what needs to be made visible. And XDW is not intended to make a record of what's happening in the institution. XDW is intended to make a record of what's useful as input and useful as output. So it's really the external view that XDW is managing. The local views need to remain local. I may ask you to do a radiology exam. You may tell me that it's done and here is that the result is available, that you had 49 steps in doing that inside your institution, in taking the appointment and all of those things. I don't even want to see it. I want to see the beginning, I want to see the end. I may ask you in the middle to tell me that you're in progress, that you've already done the examination. Well, I may ask you for some high-level intermediate step, but don't tell me about all of your detail. This is your internal job. So in a sense, what we are trying to create is not a replacement of those local workflows. It's a tool that allows to federate, to make them work together so that they are visible to each other and they can feed into each other. That's the first thing. So we should say, okay, so it's just adding some input and output. It's not a complete recasting. The second thing which is important is many workflows in healthcare are managed manually. And I would say probably 90% of the workflows are manually managed. So if I try to federate manually managed workflows, will that work? And the answer to that is yes. XDW has been designed so that if it's a human who is managing the local workflows, he can see the external input, he can provide output to the external world, and be a human, a secretary, a nurse, whatever, who is interacting with the outside and driving what needs to happen inside. This is perfectly fine. This has been designed, and without giving you too much detail, this is extremely important because it means that if we cannot deliver a simple application that gives you a manual management of an XDW workflow on a secretary's desktop, we are going nowhere. And we need that, and this is baked into the design. The second thing is, yes, but if I have a more sophisticated system, and I wish to automate the interface, so that there is not a human that looks on the outside and look at the inside and does the translation, can this be done? And yes, the standards that have been chosen in XDW are such that you can interface to any application that is managing a workflow, pretty simple, but also what is increasingly used in healthcare, workflow management system that are coming from the industry, from actually the manufacturing industry, things that are using standards like BPEL, BPMN. You may have heard about those. Some of you are maybe using some of those things in your product to manage the workflow. And IT has said, we want to cater to the current, the manual, and the future automated through non-healthcare specific workflow management tools, and leave the complete freedom so that we can take any implementation route, flexibility for the vendors, flexibility for the providers that are deploying. So that's the implementation dimension. And by the way, this is an important element for IT. IT is always trying to reconcile three things: know the problem, use the right standards, and define a profile that can be implemented now and deployed, and that is looking at the future, that has a life of existence, and that is not going to be replaced in 2 or 3 years. And XDW is no different in terms of those design. I want to finish here, give you a chance to digest this and to take advantage of the lunch, and leave the chair tell us more detail about the lunch. Thank you very much.